The establishment of Maroon communities was, without a doubt, caused by the institution of slavery in the Americas. Enslaved people fled from harsh living conditions, back-breaking labor, brutal treatment and punishment all the time. And it should come as no surprise that the locations that flourished the most were those with the most repressive slavery regimes. But it is important to understand the difference between slave runaways and those that were called Maroons. Although runaways formed Maroon communities, many slaves fled from bondage, yet never became Maroons. And the transition from a runaway to a Maroon involved several stages. Many runaway slaves left their plantations for a short period of time and were either caught or returned voluntarily after a few days or weeks. Not all slaves possessed the skills to fend for themselves in the mountains, woods, or swamps. For many, once hunger set in, returning to the plantation to face punishment was for some preferable to starvation. Maroons, on the other hand, had no intention of returning to slavery. They set out to form independent communities that would be self-sufficient and could exist outside the systems of government created by European slave masters. Borderland Maroons, for example, resided in the forests and swamps between plantations and the spaces that Europeans legally owned but never actually cultivated. These spaces were often close to slave villages, and most slaves were familiar with them. Borderland Maroons, in many cases, had easy access to support from plantation supplies and tried to maintain links with family or friends. Hinterland Maroons, on the other hand, went further from their places of enslavement, deep into uninhabited mountains, woods, and swamps, where they hoped to carve out lives for themselves as a group. This distinction is important because it helps us to distinguish between those who sought to separate themselves entirely from slavery and those who continue to interact with it on some basis. Since hinterland Maroons intended to be at a particular location for a lengthy period, the most pressing needs for them was to secure sufficient food, water, and security. Most Maroon communities were located near a source of fresh water, and many relied on hunting game that was plentiful in the mountains, woods, and swamps. However, the larger Maroon communities, those that were more organized and structured, cleared land for planting crops to feed their larger populations. The very largest Maroon communities, like the Quilombos of Palmares in Brazil, reached high levels of sophisticated organization and had populations that reached into the tens of thousands. The Jamaican Maroon communities survived by raising animals, hunting, and growing crops. And the Maroons of Nanny Town and similar communities survived by sending traders to nearby market towns to exchange food for cloth and weapons. Their particular community was organized very much like a typical Asante society in Africa, which may provide some evidence to one of the legends that Queen Nanny was of royal African blood and came to Jamaica as a free woman. "30 years after Zumbi and the Quilombos of Palmares were destroyed by the Portuguese in Brazil, on the small Caribbean island of Jamaica, a group of runaway slaves established a Maroon community called Nanny Town. Similar to the Quilombos of Palmares, they too had a warrior king who had proved to be a military genius in battle, and who is believed to have descended from a royal African family. And like Zumbi, their leader was loved, supported, and revered. The only major difference was this warrior leader was a woman by the name of Queen Nanny. Jamaican Maroons were a group of enslaved Africans that freed themselves by escaping to the mountainous interior on the Spanish and later British colony of Jamaica. These Africans were enslaved by the Spanish from 1493 through 1655, and later by the English when they invaded Jamaica in the mid-17th century. Enslaved Africans continually resisted slavery, and many freed themselves by running away and becoming Maroons. Under the Spanish, slave uprisings and revolts increasingly disrupted the sugarcane trade and economy in Jamaica, making it less profitable. When the English invaded Jamaica in 1655, many Spanish colonists fled, and many of their slaves escaped as well. Together with free blacks, mulattoes, former slaves, and native Tiano Maroons, who were escaped slaves that lived in the Blue Mountains since the time of Columbus, they coalesced into a number of ethnically diverse groups in the Jamaican interior. After British authorities took control of the island, treaties were signed with the Windward Maroons of the East. At least for a while, these agreements were responsible for decreasing the uprisings. However, and eventually, the British betrayed these agreements with the Maroons, and a series of military wars commenced. During the years of warfare, the British sustained significant losses in their battles with the Windward and Leeward Maroons of Jamaica. Similar to the warriors of the Colombos of Brazil, many of their victories against the British were attributed to their mastery of guerrilla warfare. From 1655 until the signing of peace agreements with the British in 1739 and 40, the Windward Maroons from the East led most of the slave rebellions in Jamaica. They were known to raid plantations for weapons and food, burning the plantations, damaging the lands, and leading freed slaves to join their Maroon communities. During a 30-year period, Queen Nanny was highly successful at organizing plans to free slaves and helping them to resettle in Maroon communities. When the Spanish left, many formerly enslaved Africans escaped and enhanced the ranks of the Windward Maroons. Together with other liberated slaves, they staged a prolonged fight against English enslavement. By the 17th century, more slaves escaped and joined the two main groups of Maroons, the Windward Maroons in the east and the Leeward Maroons in the west of Jamaica. The Windward Maroons were headed by Queen Nanny, who shared leadership with her brother-in-arms, sometimes referred to as her brother, leader named Kuo, while Captain Cujo led the Leeward Maroons in Akapong in the west. The Windward Maroons fought the British in the east from their villages in the Blue Mountains, while the Leeward Maroons fought them from the west side of Jamaica. Failing to defeat the Windward Maroons under the leadership of Queen Nanny, the British sued for peace, signing a peace agreement in 1740. This agreement stopped the hostilities, provided sanctioned freedom for the Maroons, and granted 500 acres to Queen Nanny and her followers. The Maroons waged a successful war against British colonial forces for over a decade. From 1728 until 1734, Queen Nanny and her right-hand warrior, Quo, sometimes referred to as her brother, controlled an area in the Blue Mountains. Their strategic location was a 900-foot ridge overlooking the Stony River in the Blue Mountains, making a surprise attack by the British very difficult. This area was later named Nanny Town and was frequently attacked by British colonial forces. Apparently, the British wanted to stop them from raiding and also believed that the Maroons prevented them from settling the more interior regions of the island. Although the British were able to capture Nanny Town on more than one occasion, they were not able to hold on to it due to numerous guerrilla attacks from the Maroons. In 1734, a British captain, Stoddard, attacked Nanny Town and described the following situation.
They were strategically located on one of the highest mountains in the island and accessible by only a single path. It is steep, rocky, difficult, and not wide enough to admit the passage of two persons abreast.
By this time, Queen Nanny had become a folk hero among her people, the Maroons and slaves. To heighten their enemies' fear, Queen Nanny and her warriors never killed all of the attacking forces. She would always allow some to live and return to their base to relay the story and horror of their battles. They pioneered the use of a horn with a hole drilled in one end called the abbing. It was used for long-range communications and allowed Maroon lookouts to communicate over great distances. Further, these communications were not understood by the British, who had no similar communications capability. Also, they kept troops at bay with guerrilla tactics such as camouflaging themselves in trees. Queen Nanny's troops were masters of camouflage and so proficient at disguising their locations that British troops would often circulate tales of trees in the forest, becoming alive and attacking them. After two exhausting Maroon wars in 1720 to 1739, almost 19 years, in 1795 to 1796, the British capitulated and signed peace treaties with the Maroons. These treaties enabled the Windward Maroons to remain free and self-governing until slavery was abolished in the British Commonwealth in 1834. Representatives of the British governor in Jamaica signed a treaty with the Windward Maroons in 1740 between the colonial authorities and Quo. Quo, Queen Nanny's right-hand warrior, later became one of the leaders of Crawford's Town. This treaty between the colonial authorities and Quo's Maroons made no mention of how much land would be allowed to Crawford's Town. As a result, a number of disputes occurred between planters and the Maroons of Crawford's Town, and later, the succeeding towns of Charlestown and Scottstown. The Assembly of Jamaica often tried to resolve the land disputes in favor of the Maroons in order to keep the peace. Later that year, there was a separate land grant signed with Queen Nanny and the Maroons of Nannytown, granting a 500-acre parcel of land in the parish of Portland. The rebuilt Nannytown consisted of the 500 acres of land granted by the government and was renamed Moortown. In addition to this, another 500 acres of land was purchased from a neighboring planter to increase Moortown's communal land to 1,000 acres. Eventually, there were 5 Maroon towns recognized by the colonial authorities: Cudjoe's Town, later named Trelawney Town, Accompong Town, Charlestown, Scott's Hall, and Nannytown, later renamed Moortown. Some claim that Queen Nanny died in the 1760s, but her death remains a mystery. Still, many believe that her remains are buried at Bump Grave in Moortown. Enslaved African runaways in western Jamaica ran to what was called Cockpit Country and established the first community of Leeward Maroons in the mountainous interior region. They emerged about 1690, following a rebellion on the Sutton Estate in western Jamaica, whereby most of the enslaved Africans ran away and formed the Leeward Maroons. Captain Cudjoe was the leader of the Leeward community of Maroons that established Cudjoe's Town, later renamed Trelawney Town. For nearly half a century, until 1739 and 40, these Maroons, along with the Windward Maroons under Queen Nanny in the eastern part of Jamaica, victoriously resisted conquests by colonial forces. It is believed that Captain Cudjoe was the free-born son of Nakwan, who was the first leader of the self-liberated Maroons of Cockpit Country. Also, oral legend states that in 1720, Captain Cudjoe challenged a Madagascan African for leadership of the Leeward Maroons. After defeating him, he became the leader of the Western Maroons. It is also believed that Captain Cudjoe united his people under the Kinda Tree in Cockpit Country as they struggled and fought for their independence. This tree symbolizes the common kinship of the community on its common land. The Kinda tree is a type of ancient mango tree that is believed to still be standing even today. Further, It is the site of the signing of the treaty between the Leeward Maroons and the British in 1739. It is important to note that Accompong Town is another historic Maroon village located in Cockpit Country, where the Leeward Maroons encountered the indigenous Tiano Maroons. These Tiano Maroons are believed to have migrated to Jamaica from Suriname as enslaved Africans and later escaped into the mountains during the era of Spanish domination in Jamaica. Also, it is believed they were often mistaken as part of the Mosquito Indian community. The Tiano Maroons established a fortified stronghold in the mountains, where they defended and maintained their independence from the Spanish and later the British. Apparently, Captain Cujo had a brother, who was also named Accompong, like the town, whom he reportedly assigned to watch over the town. After years of warfare, the Leeward Maroons, along with descendants of the Tiano Maroons, established their independence, self-government, and recognition as a people by signing a peace treaty with the British in 1739. During the First Maroon War, the Leeward Maroons fought a long, guerrilla war with the British to secure their independence. However, hostilities ended with the Treaty of 1739, and the Leeward Maroons were granted 1,500 acres of land between Cujo's Town, Trelawney Town, and Accompong Town. However, this treaty did not recognize Accompong Town or grant them any land. In 1759, a dispute between Accompong Town Maroons and colonial plantation owners erupted, resulting in Accompong Town being granted 1,000 acres of land. In addition to granting a certain amount of political independence and economic freedoms, the agreement called for military support from the Accompong Maroons in the event of evasion or rebellion. Also, they were required to return runaway slaves, for which they were paid a bounty. This clause in the agreement naturally caused tensions between a large portion of Maroons and many of the still enslaved Africans. Still, some escaped slaves managed to find their way to Maroon communities and in many cases were allowed to stay. However, the Accompong Town Maroons earned a steady income from hunting down runaways on behalf of colonial plantation owners. After the treaty, Captain Cujo became the official ruler of Trelawney Town, while Accompong ruled Accompong Town. In the 1760s, the Maroons of Accompong Town played a significant role in helping the British to suppress rebellions in western Jamaica. For example, the slave rebellion known as Tacky's War, spearheaded by Coromantee slaves led by a Fante Royal named Tacky, were captured by the Accompong Town Maroons, led by Captain Quishi in 1761. Also, when Captain Cujo of Trelawney Town died in 1764, Accompong, the leader of Accompong Town, tried to take over Trelawney Town. However, the British governor, Roger Ellison, asserted authority over the Leeward Maroons by instructing his superintendent, John James, to take authority away from Accompong. As a result, Superintendent James instructed Accompong that he only had authority over Accompong Town. It seems that Accompong continued to rule over Accompong Town for at least another 10 years. After the death of both Captain Cujo and Accompong, control of the Leeward Maroons passed to British superintendents who were appointed by the governor to supervise over the Maroons' towns. When the Second Maroon Wars broke out in 1795, the Maroons of Trelawney Town took up arms against the British, but the Accompong Town Maroons swore allegiance to the British. In fact, the Maroons of Accompong Town fought against the Maroons of Trelawney Town on behalf of British colonial authorities. During the Second Maroon Wars, the Accompong Town Maroons suffered significant losses. Apparently, when the captain of the Accompong Town Maroons went to surrender to the Trelawney Maroons, he was killed and beheaded. Also, it seems a newly arrived British colonel, William Fitch, ignored the advice of his experienced Maroon trackers and led his forces into a Trelawney Town Maroons ambush. This mistake proved fatal to Fitch, his militia, and many Accompong Town Maroons. In the end, the Accompong Town Maroons and British colonial militia overcame the Trelawney Town Maroons and eventually deported them to Nova Scotia.